Okay. I will be talking about Suncrest Hospice and Palliative Care and a research that I went over. One of the first questions is identify an ethical dilemma or a situation involving bias you were confronted with or observed from your own practice. So at my internship that I just finished, I was considered a medical social worker, an intern, and part of my job at the time was to go to different facilities. This would be either group homes, residential homes, hospitals, or private homes. Not too much on the private homes, but with these residential homes or group homes, there were situations where I was confronted with a lot of issues with hospice. Um, just for background, this is my first time really working with the elderly. I've only previously worked with children. So it took me probably half of my internship to get comfortable talking with the elder population, talking especially with medical professionals such as the nurses, doctors, CNAs, everyone else involved in care, and a lot of confusion on who to ask, what was okay, what was not okay. So a lot of challenges that I ran into or I staffed with my supervisor and other colleagues was that with APS, with Adult Protective Services, there are a lot of challenges that they do face at Suncrest. From what I researched and what I found at Suncrest is that there's no real guidelines or regulations to define what is abuse, and compared to child protective services where there's so many rules and laws and people do advocate a lot on behalf of children, and there's so much less for APS. There's a lot less federal funding, and it does also vary by state. In the state of Arizona, from Suncrest's point of view, my supervisor is the director of social work, and part of her job is when staff report that there might be suspicions of any kind of abuse, that's where she has to follow up, and she'll either go in person or she'll ask a nurse or someone else to follow up because it does make it difficult. A lot of the elderly people do bruise easily, and sometimes it's are they bruising because they fell in their bed, or are they bruising because staff is not treating them with care or as gentle as they should be? And then there's also situations where people that lay in bed a lot, they have bed sores, and sometimes that can happen from staff like CNAs or nurses just not turning them enough. Would that be considered abuse? So there's a lot of questions, more questions than actually really knowing where the line is of abuse, or it's just medical because they are elderly and more fragile. So that was an ethical issue that I ran into, and would ask, how do you know? How can you tell? When should you step forward to call APS and take it from there? Another one would be um, with social workers, especially at Suncrest, when you're just working nonstop, you do get burnt out. You do have those issues where um, if you're just burnt out, or if you're new like I was, you might not be confident or confident in practice, and you might feel uncomfortable to check in with medical professionals and other organizations. I know when I first started, I wasn't really asking the CNAs or caregivers at shelters to follow up if there were any concerns or anything. I would just leave it to the nurses to do that. And then once I figured out who was who, what was what, I was more confident and able to really ask those questions, even though I know that the nurse will come by later today and ask those same questions. It just it just ensures us that if a caregiver tells me something but doesn't tell the nurse, or if they forget, or if someone else is there and sees something, that we have the most up-to-date information. So definitely being competent and confident as a social worker in practice is really important. We do have that bias. Well, I'm new, I don't feel comfortable, I don't want to do it kind of situation. Another one was ethical encounters that we might go through would be just motivating the patients, being compassionate and trusting and respectful. Patients really do need to be engaged. So making sure that if they live in a residential home, group home, that staff is actually taking the time to talk to them, working with them, and just not letting them stay in their rooms by themselves, and just being engaged, because if they're just in their rooms all day, no one talks to them, no one checks in on them, then they're just going to deteriorate and not have that care, that comfort that they really need at the end of their life stages. So that's really just a constant dilemma of, do I report it? Do I ask? Is it just because it's short staff with what's going on? So that was a lot of things to go through as an intern, and going into those examples, it was just a learning process. I would staff with my supervisor, or I would just call one of the other social workers that has been there the longest, that is the go-to when my supervisor wasn't available, and just asking, hey, does this sound right? What do you recommend? Is this normal? Because what I might be concerned about might be normal um, situation. For example, the first few times I saw people really bruised, I was really concerned and thought they were being abused, but it's just the elderly really have really high fall risks. Um, Even if the bed is almost to the ground, because they are older and fragile, they do bruise easily. So I just had to learn that and learn when to follow up if it was a fall, if it was reported, if not, why wasn't it reported in time kind of situation. Um, so a lot of new things to learn from there. Another thing is, how did the presence or lack of presence and diversity influence this experience? I think with diversity outside of those examples was, there weren't too many, I guess, people of color that are medical social workers. Just a handful of people of color, which really doesn't reflect the population that they serve, because the population served at Suncrest is diverse. It's not just Caucasians or other ethnicities or cultures. There are the Asian population, the Hispanic, and everybody else. So I think that should also reflect in staff, so that we're all aware or talk to each other, maybe have more meetings on how we should approach a certain culture. I know that we did have a training once on how to discuss cultures from that were religious differences, since they do have different methods of um, how they want to be buried, or their whole process for the whole end of life stages. And just knowing that everyone has those differences is important for us to be able to properly work with them. If we don't even ask those questions, then it might not be like we're carrying with the families frameworks of knowledge and resources. A lot of it is strength based. It's just being really supportive and being there for the families, because it is a tough time with grief, and just watching your loved ones just slowly either talk, be forgetful, things like that, where it's just really difficult for the caregivers, their families, especially if this is the first time they're experiencing the process of seeing someone eventually pass, or if the patient is by themselves, they have no relatives, no family, friends, or anything, then just really being there for them, having volunteers for them, all the services that they need, just to have that support so that they're not alone. So that's a lot of strength based on them. And lastly, it would be the question on the social work's ethical responsibility for the social work profession. So part of that is just having that integrity of the profession, evaluation, and research. I definitely researched a lot and I asked a lot of questions with other social workers that have been at Suncrest for a while and just really talked through them weekly, daily, just making sure that the information I received from staff, from patients, was good information, was I was notating it right, or knowing how to ask the right questions on, is this patient being abused? Do they need services, or is it just a medical condition? And just really learning everything that you can. Um, at the end of my internship, I wouldn't say that I'm 100% educated on everything. There's still a lot for me to learn. I learned a handful of medical terms, and just when I think I know enough, there's a new medical term out there that I'm not 100% sure on what it is. So just being competent again and confident in asking the nurse, what does this mean? What are the benefits, or what can I tell the caregiver if you're not going to reach out to them, kind of situation. And with this presentation, with the research impact, knowing the information on the community that you're serving and what kind of ethical issues you might come up with. It's also important to have a plan on who to call, who to talk to when you do have concerns. In this case, it was my supervisor, my field supervisor that approves my hours that I would talk to um, when I had questions or concerns. And the other, I guess she was kind of like a supervisor, Christina, who I would also talk to help me as well. If I were in another agency, I might not feel so comfortable to ask on any ethical issues that might come up. And I think that's really important to find that person that you feel comfortable with to talking to, especially as you move forward as a social worker. We need to find that person, whether it's our supervisor or somebody else, so that we can get feedback and make sure that we're documenting and notating everything that needs to be notated. The rest of my little presentation, I just have a picture of Suncrest, little quote, hospice is such a tremendous thing. Patients seem to reach an inner peace. A couple photos of um, hospice and palliative care. And over here I have who is involved in patient and family care. It would be volunteers, physicians, spiritual counselors, social workers, brief counselors, hospice aides, therapists, and nurses. And I'm sure there's more. There's also advocates and the funeral homes that also do reach out to families. There's a lot of people that do go into helping the patient and family as they go through the process. And below I have all my resources that I used for this presentation. Thank you. Stop.